Welcome to Story Flick Films, where every movie becomes a thrilling journey in minutes. No long waits, no boring explanations, just the biggest twists, shocking moments, epic action, and unforgettable endings packed into fast-paced movie recaps. From blockbuster adventures and emotional dramas to mind-bending sci-fi and suspenseful thrillers, we bring you the complete story with all the excitement intact. So hit subscribe, grab your seat, and get ready for a cinematic experience like never before, because here, every movie has a story worth telling. Deadliest is a 1996 American martial arts adventure film starring and directed by Jean-Claude Van Damme. In his directorial debut, it co-stars Roger Moore, a James Remar and a Janet Gunn. The plot, set in 1925, follows New York thief Chris Du Bois, Van Damme, who is sold into slavery by Lord Edgar Dobbs, Moore, and, after receiving a Muay Thai training in Siam, enters an ancestral martial arts tournament in Tibet to earn back his freedom. Deadliest premiered in Turkey on April 19, 1996, and was released in the United States on April 26, 1996. It was the last of a 5-picture deal between Van Damme and Universal, and the actor continued his career at Columbia. Hyped as Van Damme's be-all-and-all martial arts film, it had a complex development and was the subject of several grievances by the star's former friend, Frank Dux. The latter succeeded in obtaining a story credit from the Writers Guild of America, but failed to prove in a court of law that his contributions had been improperly compensated. The film, though it underperformed domestically at the box office, did better internationally and was a commercial success. Plot: late at night, in an empty bar in the present day, the mid-1990s, an old man enters and awaits service. Not long after, a group of thugs arrives and attempts to rob the till. The old man defeats them easily, one by one, with hand-to-hand combat. Amazed, the bartender asks how he learned to fight. The old man replies, "It was long ago." The story flashes back to Christopher Du Bois, a pickpocket in his mid-20s, living in 1925 New York City. Orphaned as a child, Du Bois looks after many young orphans by performing cons and stealing. After stealing a large sum of money from a group of gangsters, Du Bois and the children are found by the gangsters. Du Bois subdues the gangsters, but the struggle draws the attention of the police. After promising to return to the children, Du Bois escapes the police by stowing away on a boat. He is found out and imprisoned by gun smugglers and pirates and forced into physical labor. Eventually, the crew decides Du Bois is no longer needed, but before he can be killed, the pirate ship is attacked and boarded by a mercenary Englishman, Lord Edgar Dobbs. After saving each other's lives, Dobbs agrees to help Du Bois return home but deceives him and sells Du Bois into slavery on an island off the coast of Siam, where Du Bois is trained in Muay Thai fighting. 6 months later, Dobbs and his partner Harry Smythe find Du Bois fighting in a Muay Thai match and see that he has become a skilled fighter. Dobbs later assists, and exploits, Du Bois, buying his freedom so the now expert fighter can represent the U.S.A. in a Kumite tournament called the Gang Gang, held in the lost city of Tibet. There, representatives of Germany, Soviet Union, Scotland, Spain, Turkey, Brazil, Korea, Siam, Greece, France, China, Japan, Okinawa, Africa and Mongolia fight in elimination bouts. The tournament winner receives a valuable statue made of solid gold, the Golden Dragon. Along for the journey are American reporter Carrie Newton and heavyweight boxing champion Maxie Devine. Du Bois ultimately wins the tournament by defeating Khan, the representative of Mongolia, and he is given a medal and proclaimed the greatest fighter, but does not accept the Golden Dragon. Instead, he trades it for the lives of Dobbs and his comrade Harry, who were sentenced to death for previously trying to steal the Golden Dragon. In the bar, Du Bois explains he returned to New York and helped the children get off the streets. Devine helped to train many great fighters, while Dobbs and Harry opened a trading post deep in the Amazon. In the final scene, a book closes, revealing its title and author Athequista by Carrie Newton. Cast: Ascents Jean-Claude Van Damme as Chris Du Bois, Ascents Roger Moria as Lord Edgar Dobbs, Ascents James Remara as Maxie Devine, Ascents Janet Gunna as Carrie Newton, Ascents Jack Ngia as Harry Smythe, Ascents Sakie Leonga as Copra and Ascents Louis Mantivara as Reggie. Ascents Chang Ching Ping Chaplin as Master Chi. Ascents Ryan Kutrina as Officer O'Keefe. Ascents Abdelka as Khan, a Mongoliana fighter. Ascents Jin Sung as Fangpa and Siamese fighter. Ascents Stefanos Miltskaki Sasagrika fighter. Ascents Song Suhan as a Korean fighter. Ascents Peter Wong as a Chinese fighter. Ascents Ka Ringji Kitaoa as Kyoshiro Yama, a Japanese fighter. Ascents C8 tilde copyright Sar Carneiro as a Brazilian fighter. Ascents Habi Hesk as a German fighter. Ascents Peter Milita as a Spanish fighter. Ascents Esdin Nuri as a Turkish fighter. Ascents Britt Bronski as a Russian fighter. Ascents Winston Ellis as a African fighter. Ascents Dakis Triglas as a French fighter. Ascents Mike Lambert as a Scottish fighter. Ascents Choi Nam Yip as a Okinawan fighter. Ascents Zevri Vaka as Turk captain. Ascents Chai Chitmanand as Lama announcer. Ascents Christopher Van Varenberg as young Chris Du Bois. Production. Van Damme presented the project as his farewell to the genre that had made him famous via films like Ia Bloodsport and A Lionheart, and aimed to mix the secret tournament concept of the former with the cachet of classic adventure movies. On several occasions, the film was referred to as the Ibn Hora of martial arts films by an enthusiastic Van Damme, a reference to the Oscara record. Another inspiration was the famous Belgian comic The Adventures of Tintin. A new title also presented the advantage of not having to share a cut of the profits with the Bloodsport producer Mark D. Sale. The film started Lifada Epic Productions, an outfit co-founded by a double impact top producer Moshe Diamond, where it was most commonly known as an Enter the New Dragona, and slated to get underway in 1993 after Diamond lost control of Epic in a power struggle with his lenders. CRA copyright Deadliest. It was phased out in favor of a very similar project at Diamond's follow-up company Signature Films. Introduced at the 1993 Cannes Film Market, the new film was called At the Quest. A planned publicity stunt would have seen Van Damme fly above the French city in a Quest-branded hot air balloon, mirroring his exploits in the then-current script, but it had to be called off due to bad weather. Due to the deep connections between Epic and its distribution partner Vision International, the latter was also affected by the CRA copyright Deadliest dispute, and Vision president Mark Damona left to launch a new company of his own, AMDP Worldwide. Athequesta international distribution rights followed him from Vision to MDP. Universal retained domestic and UK rights. Athequesta was scheduled to begin filming at the end of 1993 for a Christmas 1994 release, but it was delayed and a sudden death. Another Quintino script that had piqued Van Damme's interest was made first. At an early stage, Van Damme expressed interest in hiring Andrei Konchalovsky to direct. Although the announcement was not strictly official, the Belgian acknowledged that he was likely to direct when the project was re-announced at Cannes 93. According to Lettich, he was invited to co-direct the film with Van Damme, but turned it down to quash false assumptions that the Belgian had ghost-directed their previous collaborations. And because he did not want to work with producer Moshe Diamond, the actor eventually took sole directorial credit and chose Peter MacDonald, who had helmed a second unit and reshoots in Nowhere to Run, to support him as second unit director. MacDonald also helped storyboard the entire film for Van Damme, and received an executive producer credit. Nowhere to Run as cinematographer David Gribble, an Australian like much of the technical crew, was brought back as well. Early on, It was announced that a double impact Sir John J. Moore would return as production designer. The final film was instead designed by Steve Spence, a veteran of many Thailand-based movies, including the Moshe Diamond back at A Man of War. During its Cannes announcement, the Quest's provisional budget was pegged at $30 million, which remained the most frequently quoted estimate as pre-production was ramping up in late 1994. Numbers as high as $35 or $40 million were sometimes bandied about, as Van Damme claimed that a 6-month shoot would be needed to bring his vision to life. However, the star later told the Los Angeles Times critic Kevin Tomasa that only $12 million had actually gone into the production. There are indications that its biggest set piece, a large-scale horseback battle planned for the halfway point, was cut at the behest of producer Moshe Diamond. Writing credits according to longtime Van Damme associate Sheldon Lettich, he was offered to co-write, but was busy with other projects and only pitched a few ideas. While by then, there were many doubts about Dux's martial arts credentials, Van Damme and Lettich still found some merit to his narrative ideas. They asked Diamond to hire him and, given his inexperience, paired him with Ed Khma, who had authored the original draft for Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, circa 1992. Amidst the transition between Epic and Diamond's new company signature, Van Damme and the producer severed their relationship with Dux and assigned the project to one of Diamond's regular writers, Adrian Quintano. This ultimately led to a lawsuit from Duxa, CIA Section A litigation. Late into pre-production in spring 1995, the script was credited to Quintano and Lettich. Despite the latter's reportedly limited involvement, the final screenplay was credited to Paul Mones and Stephen Klein, the latter a pseudonym for Quintano, who opted not to be credited. According to Lettich, Khma also opted out of his writing credit. Khma later resumed credited him with a producer role in The Quest, although this does not appear in the finished picture. Such credits are sometimes negotiated by writers who cannot be mentioned in their actual capacity for regulatory or other reasons. After Dux made his case to the WGA, the organization recommended the unusual credit story by Jean-Claude Van Damme and Jean-Claude Van Damme Frank Dux, which first recognized the star's solo creation of the story of The Quest, then his co-authorship, with Dux, of the story of its precursor, Enter the New Dragon. This was broadly similar to the double screenplay credit received by Jeffrey Bohma for A Lethal Weapon 3. However, Van Damme asked for one of his 2 story credits to be deleted from the finished film so that it would look more equal drafts. Although Lettich only had minimal input, he does claim to have come up with the idea of setting the film in the past. This further pushed it into the adventure genre, as the tournament's remote location could not be accessed by modern transportation, and each combatant would have to embark on a journey to get there. In 1991, Van Damme described the film as taking place circa 1930, with a China's Shaolin Temple and a Forbidden City as marquee locations, and another part set in Tibet. Malaysia was an alternate option thanks to its Buddhist temples. The idea of a mountaintop castle built especially for the shoot was already present. The beefy, 150-page script featured a party of 4 characters, including a child raised by a Japanese family in China, and a balloonista from France. Early versions went by the name The Big Fight, Enter the New Dragon, and The Kumite, Enter the New Dragon. The main character was already named Du Bois. When it was reintroduced as The Quest in 1993, the film was now set in 1860. A Paris or Pragia would be a major shooting location, although the pirate abduction was present, and the remainder of the film would take place in Tibet and China, with the Forbidden City again mentioned as a possible backdrop. The new script was not shown to buyers at that time, and it was still being worked on by Quintano. One source states that the hero's name was temporarily changed to Dilla in that version. By 1994, the general storyline seemed to be in place, with the slavery subplot and the stops in New York, Thailand and China all accounted for. However, it was quoted as taking place in 1902. And Van Damme expressed interest in making his character a boxer from Marseille, bearing some similarities with the premise of 1998's Legionnaire. Casting. Roger Moore was pursued aggressively by Van Damme for the role of Lord Dobbs, and did not initially have second thoughts about the Belgian directing the film. He thought it would be a good occasion to spend time in an exotic locale with his girlfriend Christine Ulstrup. In her autobiography, testimonial claims that the Belgian courted her for the part of journalist Carrie Newton, assuring her she was his #1 choice. The two ended up having a brief romance, but Van Damme later reconsidered his offer and Janet Gunn was hired. Van Damme had a hand in picking several of the film's fighters. The climactic opponent, a fanciful and Mongolian wrestler named Khan, was played by Abdel Kissi, a Moroccan-Belgian with a background in striking the brother of femme Michel Kissi. He had already played the final antagonist Tina Lionheart. Frequent Van Damme associate Peter Milota contributed to the fight choreography and played a Spanish fighter, although he wore an Albanian eagle on his belt as a tribute to his real-life origins. Stefanos Miltskakis was another favorite of the star, and appropriately portrayed the Greek contender French Algerian Azdinri was also a minor celebrity for his breaking, and was invited to be part of the film after appearing at a Paris Bercy martial arts festival attended by Van Damme. Sheldon Lettich recommended two of the fighters, copyright Sar Carnero, who had appeared in his Escape Humira themed Only the Strong, and Zaki Strigelis, an acquaintance of his agent 246-247 Nasa. Among other prospects was a young Darren Shalavi, who turned down the offer after being told by Diamond that he would have to pay his own airfare and housing if he wanted the job. Filming principal photography took place between early March and mid-May 1995 in Thailand. At the fictional fort hosting the gang was built in the mountains overlooking the town of Phame Hong Son, near the Burmese border. At the film's wraparound scenes were shot in Canada over 4 days in mid-June 1995. And Montreal stood in for New York City as related by Moore in his autobiography. The shoot was poorly organized, and Diamond tried to get the crew to work extra hours without pay to compensate for the delays, many of which, according to actor Jack McGee, were due to Van Damme showing up late on set. Moore and McGee judged that the Belgian was out of his depth as a director, and that Peter MacDonald carried much of the picture by himself. Moore was aggravated by the decision to build the fort in the mountains, as it was separated from his accommodations by a 1.5-hour drive through rough terrain. He ended up locking an during one such trip, and spent much of the shoot in a cast. Moore argued that the fort should have been built in the valley, as it was only seen at night in the film, which is incorrect. Although the Briton remained his jovial self during the shoot, he refused to talk to Diamond again after the release. Stephen Lambert was hired as fight coordinator despite an incident with Van Damme on the set of Fat Time Cop, where he was an actor and stunt performer. Van Damme wanted to end the final fight with his signature spin kick, but Lambert suggested that he surprise his fans with a punch combination instead. Although Korean representative Ong Soo-han was do a black belt, his style in the film owed more to Tang Soo-do, an early Korean martial arts form that was also less reliant on kicks. Some tensions arose as Van Damme tinkered with the matchups, juggling fighters each looking to maximize their screen time. Steinrey actually broke a table when he was told by Lambert that he would not be featured against Van Damme. Some were also protective of their on-camera persona, such as former Samoa wrestler Koji Kitao, who was uncooperative and had to be summarily written out. Release: The Quest's premiere was held at a Universal Studios Hollywood on April 20, 1996. Van Damme, riding an elephant, and more, in a rickshaw, paraded throughout the park with some of the film's martial artists, in traditional attire. The fighters then performed a demonstration of their respective disciplines on a quest-themed stage for the visitors. According to Roger Moore, Van Damme had promised him an above-the-title credit alongside himself when he signed on. But the British veteran discovered during the film's promotion that Van Damme had failed to honor his promise, further exacerbating his disdain for him. Theatrical: The Quest opened at #1 in the United States, drawing $7,029,120 from 2,092 theaters in its first weekend. The truth about Cats Dogs had a better per-screen average. The performance was viewed positively as it came opposite the beginning of the NBA playoffs. The film benefited from its PG-13 rating, wider release and less competitive date to improve on the debut of Van Damme's previous effort A Sudden Death, which was an R-rated Christmas release. However, Its box office quickly subsided and it barely outdrew its predecessor domestically, with a final tally of $21.6 million, and the film generated an additional $35.8 million in other territories, for a grand total of $57.4 million, equivalent to $115 million when adjusted for inflation in 2024, at the film, though it underperformed domestically at the box office, did better internationally and was a commercial success. Home media. The Quista was released in offset in the US on September 17, 1996, by AMC/Universal Home Video. It was a durable performer on home video, opening in 11th place and further, climbing to 7th place in its third week. The film was certified platinum by the A for sales in excess of $18 million or 250,000 copies in November. A Laserdisc version was also released on September 24, 1996. Television. The film received its domestic TV premiere on premium channel Starza on March 21, 1997. Its broadcast television debut took place on August 4, 1999. On Fox. It was billed as a world television premiere and aired opposite a rerun of Van Damme's previous vehically sudden death on the USA Network. Critical response. On our review aggregator website at Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 14% based on 21 reviews and an average rating of 3.7. It received some praise for its production values and old Hollywood atmosphere, but faced criticism for its conventional story and repetitious martial arts sequences. Audiences polled by Cinemascoria gave the film an average grade of B on an A+2F scale. Patrick McGavin of the Chicago Tribune wrote that The Quista doesn't lack for ambition, but Van Damme's staging of the fight scenes is less skillful, with a monotony that inevitably flattens the material. He also deemed the film devoid of a clear, direct narrative path to its improbable though entertaining finish. Janet Maslina of the New York Times was also unimpressed by Van Damme's direction, writing that, he one-on-one bouts have the punch-drunk symmetry of a video game. She summed up the film as studiously hokey action-adventure recalling many a Charles Bronson vehicle in its crude eagerness to please audiences anywhere on the planet. Emmanuel Lefebvre acknowledged that the film felt like a personal movie for Van Damme and that it was not badly directed or executed, but found it a self-consciously old-fashioned swashbuckling adventure and an insipidly innocuous yarn. Mick Wasally of the San Francisco Chronicle gave a middling opinion, finding that The Quista is at its best in its first half, which reminded him of a Warner Brothers. A picture from the early 30s. However, he was disappointed by the tournament part and the representation of the various martial arts, writing that it may all seem like a lot of guys yelling and kicking each other in the face. A longtime Van Damme supporter Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times was most enthusiastic, calling the film a psycho-directorial debut and a martial arts adventure odyssey that's epic in scale and high in style. He also found that it provided Roger Moore with his best part since he retired from playing a James Bond soundtrack. The Quista score was composed, conducted and produced by Randy Edelman. It was released on CD by film music label Vari-Diéresis Se Sarabandia on April 30, 1996. Edelman was in the midst of a successful run with Universal at the time, which included A Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. His work on The Quest, and its nods to traditional East Asian music, have been compared to the former music from A Dragona was also used for The Questa trailer. Litigation pre-trial Willie The Quista was publicized as a different work than Enter the New Dragon. Frank Dux considered that the finished film was a thinly disguised rework of the screenplay he had co-written for the latter. Unbeknownst to Van Damme, he presented his early script to the Writers Guild of America for recognition of his contributions. The union granted him a story credit, which can be seen in the film. Dux then filed a lawsuit against Van Damme in the Los Angeles County Superior Court, alleging that he had been improperly compensated for his efforts. The initial complaint was thrown out, but an amended version proceeded to a trial by jury, which took place between October 26 and November 5, 1998. Dux sought $900,000 in damages. His lawyer also called for Van Damme to be assessed a punitive damage as if for misrepresenting himself as a top-flight martial artist. Plaintiff's arguments. Dux's complaint alleged that he had an agreement with Van Damme for his work in Enter the New Dragon, which included a flat fee of $100,000 and 2.5% of the film's gross. Several witnesses accepted Dux's claim that Enter the New Dragon and The Quista were in fact the same film. Others recalled hearing Van Damme use language suggesting that he and Dux were in a financial partnership. According to Dux, Van Damme recommended he sign a contract with a subsidiary of Moshe Diamond's Epic Productions to receive payment for his work in Enter the New Dragon. The Epic agreement was split into 2 installments of $50,000, one for writing and one for martial arts consulting, although the second half was not paid due to the company's 1992 bankruptcy. More crucially, Dux's contract with Epic did not establish that he had been promised a percentage of the film's revenue. Dux's explanation was that Van Damme had told him that, for tax reasons, the matter of residuals would be settled separately through an overseas company. Dux testified that he had both a written note and an audio tape of Van Damme's royalty promise, but was unable to retrieve them due to extensive damages sustained by his apartment during the 1994 Northridge earthquake. Defendant's arguments. For his part, Van Damme maintained that Enter the New Dragon and The Quista were different films. He denied promising residuals to Dux, and claimed that witnesses suggesting otherwise had been misled by his idiosyncratic English. His lawyer also pointed out that the WGA had not granted Dux his desired screenwriting credit, but a story credit. This meant that only superficial elements from Dux's draft had made it into The Quest, which should not entitle him to gross points. The defense further noted that Dux's lawyers had not mentioned the existence of Van Damme's note and tape in earlier correspondence with the actor's representatives, and neither had Dux himself in his pre-trial deposition. Van Damme's counsels scored a critical blow when they summoned witnesses who contradicted Dux's claims that his residence had been rendered inaccessible by the earthquake. This greatly hurt the plaintiff's credibility in the eyes of the jury, and raised doubts as to whether Van Damme's recorded pledge had ever existed. Verdict. Ultimately, the jury found in favor of Van Damme, although some pundits deemed that the presiding judge had not been accommodating to the Dux camp. The judge also ruled that Van Damme could not be held liable for the $50,000 left unpaid after Epic's bankruptcy. Van Damme estimated that he had spent about $250,000 on his defense. Dux filed requests for a new trial, but they were denied in December 1998 and May 1999, due to his desire to remain neutral in the situation. Luttich saw his relationship with Van Damme damaged for several years. The case formed the basis for Hollywood Betrayal, an episode of the documentary series A Crime Story hosted by Richard Belzer, which premiered in Courtville on May 28, 1999. He acts not as a perfect guardian, but as a flawed protector, attempting to shield them from hunger, exploitation, and abandonment through whatever unconventional means he can manage. This element becomes emotionally important because it establishes an underlying humanity beneath his schemes and questionable methods. He steals, manipulates situations, and bends rules. Yet, his motivations are not driven purely by selfish gain. There is loyalty within him, especially toward those who possess even less protection than he does. Determined to improve their desperate situation, Du Bois develops a risky plan involving a theft, deception, and escape. The scheme reflects his personality perfectly. Ambitious, improvised, and dependent upon confidence more than careful stability. However, like many plans born from a desperation rather than sustainably opportunity, events begin moving beyond his control. Mistakes, betrayal, and escalating a danger quickly transform what seemed like a manageable hustle into a crisis capable of destroying everything he hoped to achieve. As authorities, criminals, and unintended consequences close around him, Du Bois finds himself forced into rapid flight. The city that once functioned as his chaotic but familiar survival ground becomes hostile territory where escape matters more than strategy. In trying to outrun immediate danger, he becomes entangled in circumstances extending far beyond ordinary street crime, pushing the story away from local survival drama toward international adventure. This transition is crucial because the quest deliberately expands its world in stages. What begins inside crowded urbana hardship gradually evolves into a broader narrative involving smugglers, hidden agendas, foreign locations, and cultures operating far outside Dubbo's original experience. His journey does not unfold through a heroic choice alone. Much of it emerges from accident, pressure, and the consequences of decisions made under desperate conditions. Eventually, Du Bois' attempt to flee places him aboard a ship connected to dangerous men whose interests do not align with his survival. Removed from familiar surroundings, stripped of control, and trapped among the individuals shaped by violence and opportunism, he enters an environment governed by power dynamics far more dangerous than the streets he previously understood. The tone of the story shifts noticeably during this stage. Humor and improvisation remain part of Du Bois' personality, but the risks surrounding him grow more serious, introducing the possibility that cleverness alone may not be enough. At the same time, the film begins quietly planting the seeds of its deeper thematic direction. Beneath the adventure structure lies a developing exploration of transformation, identity, and cultural encounter. Du Bois' journey is no longer simply about escaping consequences in New York. He is being pushed toward experiences capable of confronting his assumptions, reshaping his abilities, and exposing him to worlds governed by entirely different values regarding honor, combat, discipline, and personal meaning. What makes this beginning effective is the contrast between what Christopher Du Bois is at the start and the kind of environment the story is gradually moving him toward. He is not introduced as a disciplined martial artist destined for greatness. He is flawed, improvisational, impulsive, and shaped by survival instincts rather than spiritual mastery or structured combat philosophy. Buddhist stories built around transformation rarely begin with completed heroes. They begin with people unprepared for the worlds they are about to enter. And as circumstances continue pulling Du Bois further away from the only life he understands, the film begins preparing the audience for a much larger journey. One involving hidden traditions, international conflict, physical challenge, and a mysterious competition whose significance he does not yet fully comprehend. As the story of the quest continues expanding, music, beyond the crowded streets of New York, Christopher Du Bois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, finds himself pulled deeper into circumstances far removed from the small-scale hustles and survival tactics that previously defined his life. The transition from urban street survival to international uncertainty becomes increasingly important because it forces him into environments where familiar instincts begin losing their effectiveness. The quick improvisation, confidence, and a street-smart adaptability that Annecy allowed him, music, to navigate local danger are now being tested against unfamiliar cultures, shifting loyalties, and individuals whose relationship with the violence operates on entirely different terms. After his desperate escape from mounting problems back in New York, Du Bois' attempt to secure freedom places him in the hands of dangerous smugglers operating through deception, intimidation, and opportunistic exploitation. What initially appears to be a temporary solution quickly transforms into a captivity hidden beneath the illusion of transportation and opportunity. Removed from everything recognizable, Du Bois experiences the harsh realization that escape does not always lead toward safety. Sometimes, it merely exchanges one form of danger for another. Life aboard the vessel introduces a darker dimension to the story's atmosphere. The cramped environment, uncertain power dynamics, and constant tension among those controlling the operation create a setting governed by coercion rather than trust. Du Bois, music accustomed to surviving through charm, negotiation, and calculated risk, discovers, music that his usual methods offer limited protection, music, within a system maintained through force and hierarchy. The ship is psychologically, music significant because it strips away much of the control, music he previously exercised over his life. At this stage of the narrative, the film begins emphasizing a vulnerability within Du Bois' character more clearly than before. Although resourceful, music and almost unbelievably resilient, he is not invincible. He lacks authority, A. Secure alliances, A. Music, A. And meaningful understanding of the larger situation unfolding around his survival increasingly depends Music, A. But on adapting quickly in order to avoid being crushed. The story's international, Music, A. Scope also becomes more pronounced during this phase. Music, A. Geographical movement introduces cultural complexity and problems related to the emergence of simply and complex. The boy is no longer in the social media system. New York poverty and hunger. He is moving through an environment shaped by maritime networks. Music, A. Regional factions, A. And hidden agendas extending across borders. This expansion of matters because the quest is gradually transformed into a new commercial and internationally commercial narrative rooted in global movement, Music, A. And ideological conflicts. Amidst uncertainty, the boy, Music, encounters individuals whose lives and motivations differ significantly, Music, A. From his own. Some interactions are transactional, A. Others dangerous, A. And some Music, A. Quite transformative. The film uses these encounters to begin, Music, shifting his goals from individual survival to a reluctant, Music, participant in a much larger. His perspective remains grounded in practicality and immediate survival concerns. Yet, external events continue to steer him, Music, A. toward experiences connected to larger and complex and organized structures, Music, A. Of capital. He does not yet fully grasp how the Masta, Music, A. One of the most important elements emerging during this stage is the gradual introduction of martial discipline as a meaningful thematic force within the narrative. Up until now, physical conflict in Du Bois' life has largely existed through survival instincts, street encounters, and reactive violence. Combat, when present, has been practical rather than philosophical. But the environments he is entering operate under entirely different assumptions regarding fighting ability, a personal mastery, and the symbolic role of martial skill within cultural identity. This contrast begins laying the groundwork for Du Bois' transformation. He remains clever. He remains impulsive. He remains deeply shaped by improvisational survival logic. But the world surrounding him is changing faster than he is. And that imbalance creates both danger and opportunity. As conditions continue evolving, Du Bois finds himself pushed toward territories where physical endurance, adaptability, and moral choices begin carrying greater importance than simple deception or quick escape plans. The emotional tone of the story becomes increasingly layered during the process. Adventure remains central to the narrative, but beneath the movement between locations and escalating danger lies an emerging question regarding identity itself. Who is Christopher Du Bois when survival alone is no longer enough? Who does he become when placed in systems governed by discipline rather than improvisation? These questions do not receive immediate answers, but the story steadily moves us closer toward environments where the will become impossible to avoid. By the end of this phase, the sense of journey surrounding the quest grows as stronger and more expansive. Du Bois' life is no longer moving along a predictable path shaped by personal schemes and localized danger. He is being carried toward something older, stranger, and significantly more consequential than anything he originally intended to encounter. A hidden world of combat, competition, and a cultural ritual waits further ahead. He does not yet understand its rules. He does not yet understand its stakes. But with every mile separating him from New York, the distance between Christopher Du Bois' old identity and the person he may be forced to become continues growing larger. As the narrative of the quest moves deeper into its international adventure framework, a Christopher Du Bois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, becomes increasingly disconnected from the familiar logic that once governed his survival. The further he travels from New York and the chaotic but understandably environment of street hustling, the more obvious it becomes that he has entered a world shaped by forces far beyond quick improvisation, deception, or clever escape tactics. The journey is no longer simply geographical, it is psychological and cultural, gradually pushing him toward experiences capable of reshaping his understanding of combat, identity, and personal purpose. The unstable circumstances surrounding Du Bois eventually place him within environments where control changes hands rapidly and trust remains fragile. Rather than functioning as the manipulator of situations, he increasingly becomes someone reacting to a systems designed by others. This shift is important because it forces his character into unfamiliar emotional territory. In New York, uncertainty was something he knew how to manage. He understood street power, desperation, a criminal opportunism, and the informal rules governing survival among people living outside stable institutions. But the world he's entering now operates through traditions, hierarchies, and hidden structures that do not recognize his old expertise. During this phase of the film, the story begins introducing stronger elements of martial culture and a philosophical contrast. Du Bois' earlier relationship with the physical confrontation was practical and instinctive. Fighting existed primarily as a means of protection, intimidation, escape, or survival. Skill mattered, but discipline in the deeper sense, a discipline connected to identity, honor, unstructured mastery was largely absent from his worldview. The narrative now begins placing him closer to individuals and environments where combat carries cultural meaning extending beyond immediate violence. This thematic evolution becomes increasingly significant because the quest is not merely constructing a tournament narrative, it is building a transformation arc. The central question gradually shifts away from whether Du Bois can survive dangerous circumstances and toward whether he can adapt to a world requiring different forms of strength than those that previously sustained him. As he continues moving through foreign territories and unstable alliances, the film strengthens the atmosphere of uncertainty and adventure. Exotic locations, maritime danger, underground dealings, and hidden motives contribute to a sense that Du Bois is drifting toward something mysterious whose full significance remains concealed. The pacing of this progression matters because the story deliberately delivers a full revelation of the larger competition waiting ahead. Rather than rushing directly into organized combat, it allows tension, curiosity, and environmental urgency to develop first. At the same time, Du Bois himself continues struggling with the displacement. He remains resourceful, but his confidence increasingly exists alongside music, confusion and vulnerability. He is accustomed to reading people quickly, adapting under pressure, and creating opportunities inside unstable environments. Yet, many of the situations surrounding him now resist simple manipulation. Cultural unfamiliarity, shifting power relationships, and a limited understanding of broader events place him in a position where adaptability alone feels insufficient. This growing imbalance becomes emotionally important because it exposes a truth beneath his charismatic exterior. Christopher Du Bois is talented at surviving chaos, but surviving a transformation demands something more complicated. It demands the ability to learn from worlds that do not revolve around his existing strengths. The film gradually introduces this challenge through encounters, observations, and shifting circumstances that expose him to alternative ideas regarding strength and discipline. Combat begins appearing less as random violence and more as structured expression shaped by tradition and training. Although Du Bois does not immediately embrace these ideas, the narrative steadily moves him closer toward environments where he will no longer have the option of remaining detached from them. The atmosphere surrounding the story also becomes richer in a historical texture during this stage. Colonial politics, international mobility, and hidden global networks contribute to the sense that the world of the quest exists at the intersection of adventure fiction, martial mythology, and early 20th century geopolitical attention. This broader backdrop enhances the film's sense of scale, making Du Bois' personal journey feel connected to larger systems operating beyond his original concerns. By the end of this phase, the feeling of inevitability surrounding Du Bois' path becomes increasingly noticeable. He may not yet understand where events are truly leading, but the audience begins sensing that his accidental journey is slowly aligning with something far more deliberate. The scattered dangers, unusual encounters, and unfamiliar environments are not random obstacles disconnected music from one another. They are preparing him for a hidden world where combat is ritualized, national, music, pride carries symbolic weight, and warriors from different traditions gather beneath the rules older, music, and more disciplined than anything Christopher Du Bois has encountered before. Music, He is still a survivor from New York, A. Still impulsive, A. Still improvisational, A. Music A. Still carrying instincts shaped by a poverty and hustle. But the road music A beneath him is changing. With every step deeper into this unfamiliar world, at the distance between the man he has been and the fighter he may eventually become, he continues quietly and relentlessly. As the story of the quest progresses further into an expanding, music, world of danger, a cultural collision, and hidden purpose, A. Christopher Du Bois, music A. portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, A. finds himself moving deeper into music A. reality that no longer resembles the improvised survival life he was accustomed to in New York. The transformation taking, music, place around him is gradual but unmistakable. The further he travels through unfamiliar territories, A. music A. the more the film begins shifting away from simple adventure films, music A. and towards narrative depth, A. personal evolution, A. and the hidden structures of martial arts culture operating beneath it. During this phase, his understanding of the world and his place within it shifts according to the cultural systems of previous circumstances. Music A. reading danger quickly and manipulating opportunity often provided effective survival. Music, tools. Here, however, he faces situations governed by rules, expectations, and values that cannot always be solved through charm or calculated deception. This tension, music A. between old instincts and unfamiliar demands, it becomes, music, one of the most important emotional layers developing in self-respect. Music A. Du Bois is not yet undergoing a complete transformation, A. but pressure, music A. is steadily forcing him towards a self-respect. Music A. he continues to rely on the old ways that once protected him. Music A. yet the world surrounding him increasingly requires patience. Music A. observation, A. and forms of understanding that extend beyond music A. immediate needs. As the narrative broadens its international atmosphere, the film deepens its sense of mystery surrounding the larger world, slowly pulling Dubois toward its center. Hidden networks, organized interests, and rumors connected to elite martial competition begin gaining stronger narrative presence. The story does not immediately reveal everything about this secretive structure. Instead, it builds anticipation through fragments of information, encounters with unusual individuals and environments carrying an almost mythic sense of distance from ordinary life. This gradual expansion matters because the quest is not interested in presenting combat merely as spectacle. It is constructing a symbolic arena where martial skill becomes connected to a national identity, a personal discipline, and philosophical contrast between competing traditions. Du Bois does not fully recognize these yet, but the audience begins sensing that he's moving toward an event much larger than any street confrontation or a survival scheme from his past. At the same time, the film continues strengthening the contrast between a Western improvisational individualism and structured martial systems rooted in a cultural discipline. Du Bois embodies adaptability, a spontaneity, and survival through a instinct. The world he's approaching, however, A values mastery developed through a repetition, sacrifice, and adherence to a training traditions extending across the generations. This ideological contrast becomes increasingly important because it creates the foundation for his eventual evolution as both a fighter and a person. The environments through which he travels reinforce this thematic direction. Locations feel less like temporary backdrops and more like stages in a journey reshaping his understanding of power itself. Physical danger remains present, but emotional and psychological displacement become equally significant. He's not simply escaping threats anymore. He's being forced into encounters that challenge how he interprets strength, a purpose, and identity. Another important development during this stage involves the growing visibility of fighters and combat traditions existing beyond Du Bois' previous experience. The narrative begins surrounding him with indications that martial excellency in this world is not random violence or underground criminal brutality. It is structured, ceremonial, and deeply connected to cultural representation. Fighters are not merely individuals seeking personal dominance. They increasingly appear as symbolic extensions of regions, philosophies, and disciplined schools of combat. For Christopher Du Bois, This emerging reality creates quiet but meaningful pressure. He remains clever. He remains resilient. He remains capable of surviving environments that would overwhelm many others. But survival alone is slowly losing its central position within the narrative. Something else is becoming necessary. Growth, adaptation, a willingness to confront worlds that cannot be mastered using the Samia instincts that once guaranteed survival in New York's harsh streets. The emotional tone of the film becomes richer during this process because Du Bois' journey is no longer driven solely by external danger. Internal tension begins developing alongside physical movement. The question is not only whether he can reach safety or escape immediate threats. The deeper question becoming visibly beneath the surface is whether he can evolve enough to function inside a world demanding qualities he has never fully cultivated. By the end of this phase, the hidden direction of the story becomes more tangible. The scattered pieces of international adventure, underground dealings, martial mystique, and personal displacement begin aligning toward a clearer destination. A larger contest exists somewhere ahead, an event carrying prestige, symbolism, and danger far beyond ordinary combat. Christopher Du Bois has not reached that world completely yet. He does not fully understand its rules. He does not yet understand the scale of the challenge awaiting for him. But the path leading toward it is becoming impossible to avoid. And with every passing stage of his journey, the reckless survivor from New York moves closer to a realm where instinct alone will no longer be enough, and where true strength may demand a transformation far deeper than anything he originally imagined. As the narrative of the quest continues unfolding across the increasingly mysterious international landscape, Christopher Du Bois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, moves closer toward the hidden world that has been quietly shaping the direction of his accidental journey from the beginning. By this stage of the story, the scattered elements of escape, survival, maritime danger, underground dealings, and cultural displacement begin forming a more recognizable structure. The sense of randomness that defined Du Bois' earlier experiences starts giving way to a growing feeling of purpose. Even though he himself still lacks full understanding of the larger forces surrounding him. The environments through which Du Bois travels become increasingly important because they no longer function merely as locations within an adventure narrative. Instead, they operate as stages within a gradual transformation process. Each new encounter exposes him to systems of thought, discipline, and a human behavior fundamentally different from the improvisational world that has shaped his personality back in New York. The contrast becomes sharper with every step of his journey. His natural strengths, quick thinking, resilience, adaptability, and street survival instincts remain valuable, but they increasingly appear incomplete when measured against worlds governed by a ritual, training, and structured mastery. During this phase, the film deepens its exploration of martial philosophy by introducing stronger indications that a combat within this hidden international environment is not simply about physical domination. Fighting here carries symbolic meaning connected to honor, national identity, and disciplined self-definition. This distinction matters enormously because it challenges Du Bois' original understanding of conflict. In his earlier life, violence was practical. It existed as reaction, protection, leverage, or survival. It belonged to chaotic circumstances where outcomes depended on speed, nerve, and opportunistic decision-making. The martial traditions emerging around him operate differently. They frame combat as an organized expression of culture, a personal refinement, and lifelong commitment. Du Bois' relationship with this unfamiliar worldview remains complicated. He does not instantly transform into a disciplined martial philosopher. His personality still carries impatience, skepticism, and the instinct to rely on improvisation whenever uncertainty increases. Yet, the narrative steadily pushes him toward experiences where observation becomes unavoidable. He begins witnessing forms of control, skill, and focused discipline that challenge assumptions he may not even realize he holds. The atmosphere of secrecy surrounding the larger competition also becomes more pronounced during this stage. Rumors, elite participants, hidden interests, and symbolic prestigia continue building anticipation around an event existing somewhere beyond ordinary public awareness. The story carefully nurtures his curiosity, music regarding this mysterious gathering, allowing its reputation to grow before revealing its full structure, rather than treating the competition as a simple tournament. Music inserted into the plot, the film builds it as an almost mythic destination, drawing together fighters, magicians, music and competing philosophies from across different parts of the world. At the same time, the boss' internal journey grows increasingly significant in his adventures. He's still adapting to unfamiliar surroundings, still learning how to navigate music relationships and power structure as extending beyond his original experience. But subtle changes, music, begin to appear in how he responds to challenge. Moments of observation, music and strangia suggest that his exposure to this new world is slowly influencing him. Music even if he resists complete transformation. This evolution remains gradual but constant. Christopher Dubois's nota. Music grappling with his identity. He's still the resourceful survivor who seeks stability and life but the narrative increasingly suggests that he represents a part of the film also strengthens the movie space using the cultural connections between the characters to create a sense of the Dubois story. The lonely and underground and cross-cultural encounters contribute music to the feeling that the world of the quest operates beyond narrow locale and these music broader scope enhances the sense of scale surrounding the hidden martial garden, creating making it feel, music, less like an internal and more like a symbolic meeting point for computer traditional, music martial arts. As Dubois moves closer towards this concealed world, the emotional tension inside the story begins, music, shifting from immediate survival to the readiness for adaptation. External dangers are present, music but the deeper challenge emerging beneath the surface concerns life survival. Music, is truly enough inside a world shaped by a lifelong discipline? Can improvisation compete against traditions forged through rigorous training and cultural expectation? Can a man who learned strength through a chaos function within systems built around a control? These questions quietly gain momentum as the story advances. By the end of this phase, the direction of the narrative feels clearer than ever before. The mysterious competition waiting at it no longer exists as distant rumor alone. Its presence begins influencing decisions, relationships, and expectations surrounding Dubois' path. The reckless street hustler who once struggled merely to protect vulnerable children in New York now stands, music closer than ever to entering a hidden arena where warriors represent more than themselves. Combat carries symbolic weight, and a personal transformation may become the greatest challenge of all. He may not fully realize it yet, but the world he's approaching will demand more than courage, speed, or improvisational survival. It will demand discipline. And Christopher Dubois' true test has only just begun. As the story of the quest moves deeper into its hidden martial world, Christopher Dubois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, reaches a stage in his journey where the distance between his former identity and his emerging future becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. The reckless survivor from New York, once defined almost entirely by improvisation, instinct, and desperate adaptability, now finds himself standing at the edge of a reality governed by discipline, ritual, and philosophies of combat extending far beyond anything he previously understood. What began as an accidental adventure driven by escape and circumstance is gradually transforming into something far more personal and demanding. During this phase, the mysterious atmosphere surrounding the larger martial competition begins taking clearer shape. The hidden gathering that has existed as a rumor, anticipation, and distant narrative gravity slowly becomes more tangible, revealing itself not as an ordinary contest built around entertainment or financial reward, but as an elite convergence of fighters, traditions, and cultural identities. The importance attached to this event immediately distinguishes it from the chaotic street conflicts or opportunistic struggles that characterized Dubois' earlier life. Here, Combat carries symbolic meaning. Fighters do not enter merely as individuals seeking victory for personal pride, they increasingly appear as representatives of philosophies, training systems, and national traditions shaped through years of disciplined preparation. For Christopher Du Bois, this realization creates both fascination and discomfort. He remains an outsider to much of what he observes. The codes, customs, and values surrounding martial discipline do not align naturally with the personality forged through his years of instability and street survival. His instinctive approach to life has always relied on reading situations quickly, adjusting under pressure, and exploiting unpredictable opportunities. In contrast, the world unfolding before him values patience, mastery, ritual, and control developed through long-term commitment. This contrast becomes one of the defining tensions within his character development. Du Bois is not immediately transformed by exposure to martial philosophy. He remains skeptical, impulsive, and emotionally tied to his old methods of navigating danger. Yet, repeated encounters with a disciplined skill and structured combat begin creating quiet pressure inside his worldview. He starts recognizing that the strength operating within this hidden environment cannot be reduced to simple toughness or improvisational survival. The film strengthens this thematic direction through atmosphere, setting, and interaction. The environments surrounding Du Bois increasingly reflect cultural depth rather than transient adventure spectacle. Locations feel ancient, symbolic, and layered with traditions extending beyond the immediate concerns of individual survival. This sense of historical and philosophical weight reinforces the idea that Du Bois is no longer moving through a temporary danger alone. He is entering systems shaped by inherited values and disciplined identities. At the same time, the narrative continues exploring the broader international dimension of the quest. Fighters, organizers, and interested parties from different regions contribute to a world where combat becomes a symbolic meeting point between cultures. The competition waiting ahead is not portrayed as a simple elimination tournament detached from context. It feels ceremonial, almost mythological in a reputation, existing within hidden global networks inaccessible to ordinary society. This larger scope increases the emotional significance of Du Bois' journey because participation in such a world demands more than physical capability. It demands belonging, and belonging is precisely what Christopher Du Bois has struggled with throughout much of his life. Back in New York, he survived on the edges of formal society. It connected more to improvisation and unstable loyalty than to institutions or disciplined communities. Even his protective role toward a vulnerable child emerged from shared hardship rather than a structured identity. Now, however, he faces environments where identity is inseparable from tradition, training, and purpose. This creates an internal challenge more complicated than physical danger. Can someone shaped by chaos adapt to systems built around order? Can a man whose greatest skill has been survival discover meaning in disciplines requiring patience, humility, and long-term dedication? The story steadily moves these questions toward the center of Du Bois' development. As anticipation surrounding the hidden competition intensifies, the emotional tone of the narrative also becomes more focused. Adventure and exotic atmosphere remain important, but beneath them grows a stronger sense of preparation. The scattered experiences of Du Bois' journey begin feeling less accidental and more interconnected, as though every hardship, encounter, and a cultural collision has been quietly steering him toward a confrontation larger than simple combat. He still carries his old personality, still improvisational, still rebellious, still shaped by instincts learned through struggle. But the world around him is demanding evolution, and for perhaps the first time in his life, Christopher Du Bois is approaching a challenge that cannot be overcome through charm, deception, or quick escape alone. By the end of this phase, the hidden martial world of the quest stands closer than ever to fully opening before him. The tournament's presence grows stronger. The philosophies behind combat become clearer. The expectations surrounding strength begin shifting from raw survival toward a disciplined mastery. Du Bois has not completed his transformation. In many ways, It has barely begun. But the path behind him is already becoming harder to return to because the man who once fought simply to survive is moving toward a world where survival is only the starting point, and where true victory may require rediscovering an entirely new understanding of what strength actually means. As the narrative of the quest advances toward the hidden martial competition that has gradually shaped the direction of the story, Christopher Du Bois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van, Music, Dam, reaches a point in his journey where adaptation is no longer optional. The unfamiliar world surrounding him has become too rigid, too structured, music and too demanding to navigate through instinct. The reckless street survivor from New York remains present in his personality, music but the environments, people, and the philosophies now influencing his path continue challenging the foundations of how he understands conflict, strength, and personal identity. The mysterious martial gathering that once existed, music, as rumor and distant mythology begins emerging with greater clarity during this phase of the story. The film increasingly reveals that this competition is not designed to promote perspective or individual, music, liberation. Instead, it exists as a hidden ceremonial, music where selected fighters from different nations and martial artists, come together under rules, music shaped by discipline. Symbolic yakuza ceremony carries a sense of exclusivity in ancient Japan, as though participation itself signifies entry into a world of excess, and the exposure to this environment brings complications to university and discipline. The continued separation from the perspective of society and the yakuza. Years of indoctrination and destruction of this class teaches system and ideology and self-control. Music, yet, the discipline displayed by fighters and martial practitioners within this hidden world presents evidence of a different relationship with the law, one based not on opportunism or dominance, but on control defined through sustained training and philosophical commitment. This realization begins by exerting a subtle pressure on the body and mind. He is not suddenly transformed into a perfectly disciplined martial figure. His impatience, rebellious instincts, improvisational nature remains central to his character. However, the future exposure to structured combat slowly challenges the assumptions he brings to the dojo. He begins observing and analyzing the fighters, repetition and emotional control on a level largely absent from his previous life. The film deepens these contrasts through its portrayal of the fighters preparing for competition. These individuals are not merely athletes seeking personal recognition, they increasingly appear as symbolic representatives of cultural systems carrying expectations connected to a national identity, training heritage, and philosophical traditions. Combat within this environment feels ritualized rather than random, governed by rules that transform a fighting into something larger than a physical confrontation. Christopher Du Bois remains an outsider within much of this structure, and that outsider status continues shaping his emotional experience. He possesses courage and adaptability, but belonging inside this world requires qualities he has not fully developed. The narrative uses this tension effectively because it prevents his journey from becoming a simple story of instant mastery. Instead, his evolution remains grounded in discomfort, observation, and gradual confrontation with the limitations of his own methods. At the same time, the broader international atmosphere of the quest becomes richer and more layered. Hidden political interests, cultural intersections, colonial-era influences, and underground networks continue reinforcing the idea that the competition exists within a world shaped by competing traditions and shifting global realities. The event awaiting Du Bois feels increasingly significant not merely because of combat itself, but because of what combat represents inside this environment. Discipline, prestige, identity, and a symbolic conflict between diverse philosophies of strength. Also, anticipation surrounding the tournament intensifies, the emotional stakes of Du Bois' journey deepen alongside the physical ones. Earlier stages of the story focus heavily on escape, survival, and accidental displacement. Now, however, the narrative begins emphasizing a preparation, transformation, and a readiness for a challenge capable of testing not only fighting ability, but to personal character. This shift becomes increasingly important because Du Bois is approaching a confrontation with more than opponents. He is approaching a confrontation with himself, with a version of himself shaped by instability, improvisation, and reactive survival. With the question of whether a current without discipline can truly compete inside systems built around a mastery, with the uncomfortable possibility that his greatest obstacle may not be the fighters waiting, music, ahead, but the limits of the identity he has carried throughout his life. The story quietly builds this internal tension while continuing its broader adventure momentum. Exotic locations, hidden traditions, and escalating anticipations, music surrounding the martial gathering create a sense that multiple narrative threads are gradually converging toward a decisive turning point. By the end of this phase, the hidden world of the quest no longer feels distant or abstract. The competition's presence becomes immediate. The expectations surrounding a combat grow clearer. The philosophies underlying martial discipline stand directly before Christopher Du Bois, rather than somewhere beyond the horizon. He still carries the instincts of a survivor, still relies on improvisation, still resists easy submission to structured systems. But, the world awaiting him demands something more refined than survival alone. And as the path toward the competition narrows, Du Bois moves closer to discovering whether a man forged through a chaos can learn to stand inside a realm defined by discipline, honor, and a controlled mastery without losing the core of who he truly is. As the story of the quest moves deeper into its hidden martial mythology, Christopher Du Bois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, reaches a stage in his journey where the mysterious competition that has influenced the narrative from a distance begins taking on concrete reality. The atmosphere surrounding the event grows increasingly powerful, no longer functioning as rumor, fragmented information, or symbolic destination alone. Instead, it begins revealing itself as an elite gathering existing within a concealed world where combat is inseparable from discipline, prestige, and deeply rooted cultural identity. For Du Bois, whose life has been shaped by improvisation, survival, and unstable circumstances, entering closer proximity to this environment creates emotional tension that extends far beyond the physical challenge of fighting. The hidden competition emerges, music, as something far more ceremonial and philosophically layered than an ordinary tournament. Fighters from different nations and traditions are not portrayed as interchangeable opponents gathered simply for spectacle or entertainment. Each participant increasingly represents a broader system of training, values, music, and historical martial identity. The event carries an atmosphere of exclusivity and ritualized seriousness, creating the impression that combat inside this world functions as symbolic expression as much as a physical confrontation. Strength here is measured not only by power or aggression, but by discipline, control, and mastery cultivated over long periods of dedicated practice. For Christopher Du Bois, exposure to this environment intensifies the contrast between who he has been and what this world expects from those who wish to compete within it. His personality remains rooted in resilience, adaptability, and the instincts developed through hardship and street survival. He understands danger. He understands pressure. He understands how to react when circumstances become unstable or hostile. Yet, the martial environment unfolding around him demands music, something different from simple survival expertise. It values preparation over improvisation, a structure over spontaneity, and a disciplined refinement over reactive courage. This ideological difference becomes one of the central emotional tensions shaping his development during this phase of the film. Du Bois does not suddenly abandon his old identity or transform into an entirely different person. His skepticism, impulsiveness, and independent instincts remain intact. However, the deeper he moves into this hidden martial world, the harder it becomes for him to ignore the legitimacy of what he is witnessing. The discipline surrounding elite fighters is not superficial performance or empty ritual. It produces real capability, emotional control, and a level of focused mastery difficult to dismiss even from the perspective of someone who built his life around adaptability rather than a formal structure. The story uses these progression to deepen its exploration of transformation. Earlier stages of Du Bois' journey emphasize movement through unfamiliar locations, accidental displacement, and survival under changing, musical circumstances. Now, the challenge becomes increasingly internal. The question is no longer simply whether he can endure dangerous environments or navigate unpredictable situations. The more significant question concerns whether he can evolve enough to operate meaningfully inside a world whose core assumptions differ profoundly from his own. The atmosphere of the competition itself strengthens this thematic direction. The fighters surrounding Du Bois carry distinct styles, national identities, and combat philosophies, reinforcing the idea that martial skill within the quest is deeply connected to cultural representation. Combat becomes a language through which values, traditions, and discipline at a worldviews are expressed. This broader symbolic framework elevates the stakes of participation, transforming the tournament into something larger than personal ambition or individual rivalry. At the same time, the film continues preserving its adventurous international tone through layered settings, cross-cultural interactions, and hidden political undertones. The world surrounding the tournament feels removed from ordinary modern visibility, almost mythic in its secrecy and exclusivity. This atmosphere contributes significantly to the sense that Du Bois is entering territory governed by older rules and expectations than anything music he encountered during his former life in New York. As anticipation builds, Du Bois's internal conflict becomes increasingly noticeable beneath his outward resilience. He remains courageous and resourceful, but exposure to disciplined martial environments forces him to confront uncomfortable truths about the limitations of pure improvisation. Surviving difficult circumstances and mastering oneself, music, are not necessarily identical achievements. These realization carries quiet but growing music, emotional weight. Because Christopher Du Bois has spent much of his life mastering music instability, but the world opening before him is built around mastering control. The difference between those two forms of strength becomes impossible to ignore. Again, at this stage, the hidden competition stands fully revealed. The ceremonial atmosphere surrounding the combat grows stronger. The expectations of discipline and the structure, music, of the mystery become unmistakably clear. Du Bois finds himself closer than ever to participating in the world where fighters carry symbolic responsibility alongside music physical skill. Where victory demands far more than knowledge, he still carries the instinct of survival. Still questions music. He still relies on adaptability when pressure intensifies. But the challenge waiting him operates according to different principles. As the gates of this crucial game are laid out before him, Christopher Du Bois learns that his traditional ways of fighting the Brazilian can be reshaped into something better. Forged in fire, and the narrative of Christopher Du Bois is the same as his hidden need. Christopher Du Bois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, finds himself in the world of privatized combat, where discipline and symbolic representation between international fighters at each stage of the story brings a new understanding and a new reality and approaching destination. A whispered legend, music, existing somewhere beyond the horizon. It has become an immediate reality unfolding, music, within an atmosphere charged with prestige, secrecy, and the intense psychological pressure that naturally accompanies environments where skill, honor, and reputation intersect. Every participant bears visible evidence of discipline and preparation extending far beyond the norm. The tournament environment itself reinforces the distinction between the ceremonial structure and music, the serious emotional weight attached to participation. Combat here is more than a mere entertainment. It is a simple necessity. It represents years of sacrifice, a national symbolism, personal philosophy, and the disciplined pursuit of mastery. For Christopher Du Bois, entering more directly into this environment intensifies the ongoing conflict between his established identity and the expectations of the world surrounding him. He continues carrying the instincts developed through hardship, unpredictability, and street level survival. His resilience remains undeniable. His courage remains genuine. His ability to adapt under pressure continues functioning as one of his greatest strengths. Yet, the martial environment confronting him increasingly demands forms of control and discipline that challenge the improvisational logic upon which he has depended for much of his life. The of this challenge becomes clearer as the war observes the fighters surrounding him. These individuals are not merely dangerous opponents, distinguished by a physical ability alone. They embody disciplined systems of training, deeply connected to cultural history, a martial philosophy, and personal sacrifice. Their movements, attitudes, and preparation reflect worlds in which a mastery is cultivated patiently through a structure rather than discovered through desperate survival. This contrast continuously shaping the war's internal development in meaningful ways. He remains skeptical of rigid systems in many respects, still influenced by a lifetime spent surviving unstable circumstances where flexibility often mattered more than goals. However, exposure to the Hyena competition steadily erodes on a lingering assumption that improvisational resilience alone defined as a complete strength. The discipline surrounding him is too tangible, too effective, and too deeply integrated into the identities of those participating to dismiss as mere ceremonial tradition. The film deepens this thematic tension by emphasizing the symbolic nature of the tournament itself. Participants increasingly appear not as isolated competitors chasing individual recognition, but as extensions of larger traditions carrying cultural pride, martial legacy, and philosophical values into combat. This framing expands the emotional and ideological scale of the competition, transforming each confrontation into a music, something that reflects broader systems of meaning beyond personal rivalry alone. At the same time, the quest continues reinforcing its international atmosphere through layered environmental detail, hidden political undertones, and the diverse backgrounds of those gathered for the event. The competition feels almost removed from the ordinary historical reality, existing within a secretive realm where elite fighters, influential observers, and a complex, music, motivations intersect beneath strict structures and ancient expectations. This world remains fascinating, but also emotionally demanding for someone like Du Bois, whose previous existence was defined more by immediate necessity than a ceremonial purpose. As the tournament environment grows more intense, the emotional pressure inside Du Bois' journey becomes increasingly internalized. Earlier phases of his story emphasized an external danger, displacement, and accidental adventure. Now, however, the deeper struggle concerns capability, identity, and a readiness. He's no longer merely trying to survive via hostile conditions or navigate unfamiliar territories. He's trying to determine whether he belongs inside a world built around forms of strength fundamentally different from those that shaped him. Can instinct coexist with discipline? Can adaptability stand beside lifelong mastery? Can someone forged through hardship and improvisation compete meaningfully against opponents refined through structured traditions extending across generations? These questions continue gathering emotional force beneath the surface of the narrative. The atmosphere surrounding the competition reinforces the sense of approaching judgment. Every ritual element, every disciplined participant, and every indication of martial prestige contributes to the feeling that Christopher Du Bois stands before a challenge far, music, more significant than any confrontation from his past. The streets of New York, the desperate hustles, the improvised escapes, and the unstable survival strategies that defined his world now feel distant compared to the ceremonial gravity of the environments surrounding him. Yet, despite his uncertainty, something within Du Bois continues evolving, not perfection, not complete transformation, but growing awareness, an emerging understanding that survival may be only one dimension of strength, and that true mastery might require confronting aspects of himself he has spent years avoiding. By the end of this phase, the hidden martial world of the quest feels fully alive around him. The competition's symbolic importance stands unmistakably clear. The disciplined expectations of combat culture grow impossible to ignore. The distance between Christopher Du Bois and his defining test continues shrinking rapidly. He still carries the unpredictability of a survivor, A still resists easy conformity, A still approaches conflict with instincts shaped by struggle rather than ceremony. But the arena waiting him measures the fighters through standards far deeper than simple courage or resilience. And as the tournament moves closer toward decisive confrontation, Deadliest approaches the moment where adaptation, A identity, and martial capability will finally collide under pressures unlike anything he has ever faced before. Also, the story of the quest enters its most critical phase. The hidden martial tournament becomes the complete center of Christopher Dubois' reality, A portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, A where every remaining moment is shaped by anticipation, preparation, and the psychological weight of stepping into a world that operates under entirely different rules than anything he has previously experienced. By this stage, the competition is no longer a distant mystery or symbolic destination. It is fully present, structured, and active around him, demanding participation under conditions that test not only physical capability, A but also emotional control, discipline, A and identity itself. The environment of the tournament reveals its true nature more clearly as Dubois moves deeper into its structure. Fighters from different nations are now fully visible as representatives, musicae of distinct martial traditions, each carrying their own approach to a combat shaped by history, philosophy, and training discipline. The arena does not function as a chaotic battleground, but as an organized system where combat unfolds under controlled rules designed to measure skill, mastery, and adaptability. Every match becomes a reflection of something larger than individual victory, transforming each confrontation into a symbolic expression of cultural and martial identity. For Christopher Dubois, this reality creates the most intense internal pressure he has faced throughout his entire journey. His life has been shaped by unpredictability, improvisation, and survival through rapid adaptation. He understands conflict in terms of immediacy, opportunity, and instinctive reaction under pressure. However, the world he is, music, now entering evaluates strength differently. It values repetition over improvisation, a control over spontaneity, and a disciplined refinement over reactive survival. This difference forces him into a psychological space where his established strengths must either evolve or risk becoming insufficient. The emotional weight of this moment is intensified by the contrast between who Dubois was at the beginning of his journey and who he is becoming through exposure to this hidden martial world. He is no longer merely a street survivor or navigating unstable circumstances for a temporary advantage. He is now standing at the threshold of a structured system where identity is shaped through a training, commitment, and adherence to a martial philosophy. This shift does not erase his past, but places it in tension with the expectations of the present environment. As preparation for the tournament's decisive stages continues, Dubois observes more closely the fighters around him, recognizing that their abilities are not simply the result of natural strength or aggression, but of disciplined systems developed over longer periods of focused practice. Their movements reflect control, a precision, and an internalized understanding of combat principles, music, that extend beyond instinct. This exposure forces Dubois to reconsider assumptions he has carried for most of his life regarding what it means to be strong, capable, music, or prepared for confrontation. The tournament itself grows increasingly symbolic as it approaches the final stages. It is not merely a contest of elimination, but a structured representation of competing martial philosophies, where each fight contributes to a broader narrative of discipline versus improvisation, a tradition, music, versus adaptation, and control versus instinct. The environment reinforces these meaning through ritualized structure and the serious emotional presence of fellow participants, making it clear that every action within the arena carries weight, meaning, and consequence. Music internally, the boss continues to experience the tension between his instinctive identity and the expectations of the music world he is under. He remains skeptical of the existing systems and structures of society, shaped by a lifetime of suffering where the possibility of genuine transformation yet, the consistency and effectiveness of the martial discipline surrounding him gradually challenges the boundaries of his self-perception. He begins to recognize that survival can no longer, music, be the ultimate goal, and that true mastery requires a level of personal transformation. At the same time, the emotional journey of the boss begins to intensify. Earlier phases of music were characterized by fear and uncertainty and doubt. Now, however, he is moving toward music, a defined confrontation that cannot be avoided or redirected. The tournament represents a point of convergence. Music where all previous experiences, struggles, and adaptations must be tested against a structured system designed, music, to measure capability and experience. By the end of this stage, the hidden martial world of the Quisto stands fully revealed to him. No, music, longer distant and theoretical, but immediate and unavoidable. The arena is no longer waiting, music in the wings. It is actively shaping his reality, forcing him into a position, music where participation, music yet the world, music, before him now demands something more refined, controlled, and disciplined. And as he steps closer to the decisive moments of the tournament, the final question emerges with increasing clarity. Not whether he can survive what lies ahead, but whether he can evolve enough to stand as an equal within a world that defines strength through nearly different rules than the ones he has ever known. As the story of the Quisto moves into its final stretch, the atmosphere inside the hidden martial tournament becomes fully charged with inevitability, where every remaining moment carries the weight of preparation turning into action, and uncertainty transforming into confrontation. Christopher Dubois, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, now stands within a world that no longer feels distant or observational, but immediate and fully immersive, where discipline, combative philosophy, and personal identity converge into music, a single demanding a reality that cannot be avoided or simplified. By this stage, the tournament is no longer just an environment or narrative destination, but an active system operating with its own rhythm, structure, and symbolic meaning. Fighters from diverse nations and martial traditions are fully integrated into the competitive framework, and each confrontation reflects more than a physical ability alone. Every match becomes a controlled expression of training lineage, cultural discipline, and philosophical approach to combat, where victory carries a significance beyond personal achievement, and represents the strength of entire systems of martial identity. For Christopher Dubois, this environment creates a final and intensified confrontation between who he has always been, music, and what this world demands him to become. His instincts remain rooted in survival, improvisation, and adaptability shaped through hardship and instability. These traits have carried him through a danger throughout his life, allowing him to navigate unpredictable situations and to overcome immediate threats. However, within the structured arena of the tournament, these same instincts are no longer sufficient on their own, because the level of discipline and refinement displayed by other fighters reflects years of dedicated training and a controlled mastery. The emotional attention in Dubois's journey reaches a deeper level here, because the challenge is no longer external only, but internal as well. He is no longer simply adapting to unfamiliar surroundings, he is confronting the limitations of his own development. The contrast between instinct and discipline becomes sharper, not as a rejection of his past, but as a test of whether his experiences can evolve into something capable of functioning within a system defined by a structure and tradition. This internal conflict shapes his perception of every fighter, every movement, and every demonstration of controlled martial skill surrounding him. Music, the tournament itself continues, reinforcing its symbolic importance as it moves toward decisive stages. Combat is not presented as chaotic violence, but as structured engagement governed by rules that elevate each encounter into a reflection of deeper martial philosophy. Fighters operate not only as individuals seeking victory, but as representatives of disciplined systems that have shaped their entire understanding of strength. This layered meaning transforms the arena into something closer to a cultural convergence point where different approaches to combat meet, clash, and define themselves through controlled confrontation. As Dubois observes these dynamics more closely, he begins to recognize that a strength in this world is not defined solely by reaction or resilience, but by consistency, control, and mastery. Music developed through sustained discipline. This realization does not immediately alter his identity, but it begins to shift his understanding of what it means to be prepared for true competition. The gap between survival-based capability and structured martial excellence becomes increasingly visible, forcing him to reconsider assumptions formed in a life where adaptability often mattered more than formal training. At the same time, the emotional dimension of Du Bois' journey reaches a critical point of focus. His presence in the tournament is no longer accidental or circumstantial. It has become the result of a longer progression of movement through unfamiliar environments, escalating challenges, and gradual exposure to a hidden world that now demands full engagement. The idea of turning back or remaining an outsider becomes less realistic as the structure of the tournament continues drawing him deeper into its decisive stages. The fighters around him continue preparing with increasing seriousness, and the atmosphere within the competition reflects a transition from anticipation to execution. Every participant understands that what follows will determine not only outcomes, but reputations, legacies, and the symbolic weight of their respective martial traditions. In this environment, hesitation carries consequences and clarity of purpose becomes as important as physical skill. For Christopher Du Bois, the final pressure lies in synthesis, the need to reconcile demand shaped by chaos and survival with the demands of a world defined by order and discipline. His journey has not erased his past, but it has placed it in direct confrontation with a new reality that cannot be navigated through instinct alone. By the end of this phase, the tournament stands at the threshold of its decisive conclusion. The arena is fully alive, the fighters are fully prepared, and the structure of the hidden martial world has revealed itself in its complete music form. Christopher Du Bois remains at the center of this convergence, standing between identity and transformation, instinct and discipline, survival and mastery. Music, and as the final stages approach, the only remaining question is no longer whether he can adapt, but whether the version of himself forged in a struggle can evolve into something capable of standing within a world that defines strength through nearly different laws than the ones, he has ever known. As the story of the quest reaches its final conclusion, the hidden martial tournament arrives at its decisive culmination, where every thread of Christopher Du Bois' journey, portrayed by Jean-Claude Van Damme, it converges into a single defining reality shaped by combat, discipline, and a personal transformation. The atmosphere inside the arena is no longer one of preparation or anticipation, but of resolution, where the symbolic weight of the entire competition becomes fully visible through the final confrontation stage taking place between fighters representing different martial traditions and philosophies of strength. At this stage, the tournament functions as more than a sequence of matches. It has become a complete expression of everything the hidden martial world stands for: discipline refined through years of training, identity shaped through a cultural legacy, and strength measured not only through physical dominance, but through control, focus, and mastery under pressure. Each remaining fight reflects the culmination of preparation, where every moment carries consequences that extend beyond the arena itself, reinforcing the idea that combat within this world is both physical and deeply symbolic. Christopher Du Bois enters this final phase no longer as an accidental participant or displaced survivor from New York, but as someone who has been fundamentally reshaped by the journey he has endured. His earlier identity built on improvisation, instinct, and survival through chaos remains part of him, but it now exists alongside something new, an emerging awareness of discipline, structure, and controlled strength. The experiences he has endured throughout the film have not erased his past, but have forced it into direct dialogue with a world governed by entirely different principles of combat and personal development. The emotional core of this final stage lies in transformation rather than victory alone. Du Bois' presence in the tournament represents the intersection, of two worlds, one defined by instability and reactive survival, and another defined by structured mastery and philosophical approach to combat. His journey becomes a reflection of whether adaptability shaped through hardship can evolve into disciplined capability when placed under the demands of a system built on tradition and control. As the final confrontations unfold within the tournament, the tension is no longer centered on whether Dead Boys can, Music A, physically survive, but on how completely he can align himself with the demands of the world he has entered. Music A, the fighters around him represent fully realized martial identities. Each one embodies systems of A, Music A training and cultural philosophy that have shaped their interior approach to strength. In contrast, A, Music A Dead Boys stands as a figure in transition, carrying both the unpredictability, Music A of survival and the growing influence of structure and discipline. The tournament reaches its conclusion not through spectacle alone, but through music, the resolution of these competing ideals. Combat becomes the arena in which identity, a philosophy, and personal transformation are expressed.